Hi, this is CJ with CJatCompRCC.com, and in this series of videos, I'm going to be assembling the 3Racing Sakura Ultimate Touring Car. Now it's time to build the shock absorbers. We have some shock oil. In this bag, we have the shock shafts, we have our pistons, various O-rings, and E-clips. I like that the pistons are not attached to a tree. I don't think that they are molded. I think these are actually machined. Looking on their parts list on the website, they only list the machined pistons. I think this is going to be a nice quality item. We should get some good shocks out of this. These are the little silicone caps for the tops of the shocks, as opposed to building them emulsion style with bleed screws. These pistons are actually thicker in the center than they are at the edge, so the edges are as minimally thin as possible. Less surface means less stiction, less chance of binding, so I think this is going to be a good build here. I think these are going to perform well. This is the preload adjuster. You can tell when you've done a full circle, if you're trying to do 5 turns on this side, 5 turns on the other side, you've got a little notch to go from. It's a very nice feature that they've added in there. That is all the parts for one shock, and here's all the little plastic items. No problem with these being on a molding tree because these items are not going to be inside the shock going up and down. So just our shock bases, shock tops, spring retainers. I'm going to go ahead, pause the video. I'm going to cut all these off. I'm going to disassemble these so I've got all the parts ready to put the O-rings inside of these and start getting everything assembled. Read the directions carefully. They recommend that before you start building, take the little ball sockets that you screwed the shock shaft into them. Before you build, take a screw of the same size and pre-thread this piece. It makes it easier to get these shock shafts in and less chance of doing damage to the coating. I'm going to build one shock for you. Then I will go ahead and build the rest off camera. Put on one C-clip, slide the piston on. E-clip, excuse me. Snap the other one on, make sure they are fully seated into the grooves. You don't want those pistons coming off. Properly seated. You take one of the shock bodies, slide the piston on down. And I use a slightly different tool than they recommend. This is what a lot of people use, just a pair of diagonal cutters, basically a wire cutter, and you grab it just below the smooth shaft, right at the very top of the threads. If you have one of these, this is a special tool for clamping shock shafts. As you can see, it's got little rounded spots that allows you to grip the shaft and not damage the coating or score it in any way. The first piece that goes on is one of these little plastic spacers. And that just slips right in. And the next piece that's going to go in is one of these little O-rings. Now, this is not included with the kit, but I highly recommend go into your local hobby store or ordering it if you don't have a hobby store close by. This is called green slime, and it's a team-associated product. A lot of people use it. It's very helpful when you're building shock absorbers. Put a coating of this on the threads so that when you put that little O-ring in, that you're not damaging the O-ring. And then also put some green slime on the O-ring itself. That helps keep that lubricated. And just gently slide that O-ring in. It should slide over there very easily. And gently seat that on in. Then there is a small, another little spacer, little cap. It's got a little bit of an edge on it at the center, and if you look closely at the directions, you can see that faces outward. So go ahead and slide that on down, and then take the bottom cap and screw that into place. Finger tight should be good. Really shouldn't need to put any pliers on that, but give it a good firm tightening down. And you just wipe off the green slime that's on there. And then, again, if you're using the cutters, diagonal cutters to hold this, grab below the shock shaft. If you have a shock tool, then you know what to do with that. Go ahead and again, because these have been pre-threaded per the instructions, they should twist on a lot easier than if you were trying to do that without. And they recommend 1 millimeter just off the threads. That looks like we're there. Okay, so now I'm going to take this little O-ring here, this larger black O-ring, and this goes just inside the rim here. There's a little groove that slides into. There we go. Went in very easily, fits just right. When you've got your right height adjuster here, the O-ring prevents that from moving too easily. You know, it doesn't take much effort to twist yourself, but it prevents it from turning on its own. So now everything's in place. I'm going to go ahead, put it in my little shock stand here. This isn't a necessary item, but they certainly are helpful. Using the included shock fluid. I'll slowly raise the piston up a little bit and gently pull it through. Make all of these motions very deliberate and slow. The idea is to get any air that's underneath that piston, get that out of there. You may see a few little bubbles coming up. You want to take your time, let any air rise up out of here. With the shock almost full, go ahead and set it in the stand. That way any bubbles will slowly rise up out of the fluid. Looks like there's only a little one right there on the edge. Just going to let that sit for a little while, and I'm going to move on to the rest, and I'll restart the video when all 4 shocks are assembled to this state and sitting in the rack here, and then I'll go to the next step. Now that all 4 shocks are assembled, one of them still has a few little bubbles coming up, but this one has been sitting the longest. This is the first one that I started. Just note, building shocks is messy if you haven't done this before. There is only so much shock oil left, maybe enough to rebuild one of these shocks, so you are going to have to get more. So try not to have any problems. There's going to be some spillage, and that's just the nature of it. They want you to put the cap in from the side, then you just nestle that down, and it's gonna run off a bit. And then take the shock cap with the top plastic cap, put that in place, and snug it down. And don't worry about any fluid runoff. It is going to happen. Just clean the shock up afterwards. Now we have a functioning damper, and as you can see, when I pull this all the way out, I push it in, and there's just a little bit of rebound. That's the kind of reaction we're looking for. Grab the base and the top, give it a good twist. Make sure that's nice and clean. Everything's functioning properly, nice and smooth. You take your spring, one of your spring caps. It's just got a little slot in it. Just press the spring down a little bit, snap that on, and then you can adjust the preload until it makes contact with the spring. Not going to compress it yet. And there is our assembled shock absorber. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, and I'm going to move on to the other 3 shocks. Now all 4 shocks are assembled. Pay careful attention to the installation of the shocks. There is a specific front and back to the cap. It's such a small detail, it's not something that I'm going to be able to show you on camera and have that show up. But when you compare the 2 images of the correct and incorrect, it's quite obvious which way it needs to be attached. So we snap that on and snap the bottom one on. And then we go on to the next shock absorber. And identify the front and the back. And for the rear, since the spring rates and the shock fluid is the same front and rear, any of the 4 shocks will do fine at any corner. Just make sure that you carefully check what they consider to be the front and rear and follow the directions. So now we have front and rear suspension. Everything looks great. This kit has come together very nicely.